Was this an easy policy to put in place, or was it one of the more difficult ones?
The hardest part, well, I should say the hardest part, but what was remarkable was the speed with which the one big beautiful bill was passed because the president said he wanted it on his desk for signature on July 4th. And with the efforts of Secretary Bessent and many others, the president got what he wanted. And that was really an historic accomplishment. And that's now allowed the Treasury and the IRS to essentially codify the occupations that will not have to pay a tax on tips up to a certain amount. And we can get that legislation in place. There's a 30-day comment period, which means that by mid-October, we'll take new information, refine and improve anything that needs to be fixed and made better. And then by the end of the year, it'll be done so that hardworking Americans who make a lot of their money on tips will get a well-deserved tax break come the new year.
A sneak peek of this list of occupations came out in early September. It includes some casino jobs, gambling dealers, change people, cage workers, sportsbook personnel. Were there any changes to that list since September 2nd?
There's basically 68 occupations, and there have not been any major changes since then. It is possible that things could be tweaked a bit in this comment period, but basically what you saw a few weeks ago is basically what is currently in place. And the Treasury's approach was, let's look at the industries that historically have, people depended heavily on tips. So that was the starting point. What's really important is it's expanded to take account of the 21st century economy. We've got a lot of digital content providers, podcasters, live streamers, people of that sort, which is a very important and growing industry. They now as well will take advantage of the no tax on tips, in addition to all those key industries that are in your state that historically have depended on tip income.
Does that represent the digital content creator space? Does that represent a large amount of money in tips?
Potentially. Certainly, it's a growing sector. It's a growing area where you're seeing a lot of people enter the space. So I think it's a very important place. It's where people get a lot of information, a lot of entertainment from. So I do think it's key.
On the consumer front of that, these are influencers. These are a real new part of advertising and marketing and an industry that's changed a lot in the last few years.
That's right. I mean, the thing about the Trump administration is it's taken such a creative approach with all these new industries, whether, I know I'm going maybe a little off topic, but it's important when we sign things like the Genius Act and are making use of things like stablecoin. It's all part of the same ecosystem. These are new technologies, new industries, new jobs that the U.S. wants to be at the forefront of. And that's why I think this legislation is, in broad terms, so important. And especially this no tax on tips, I think, is just really creative, really thoughtful. I mean, it was so great that the opposing party stole it as their own almost the second that it came out of President Trump's mouth.
I'll continue on the same thread a little bit about changes. The way people pay and the way people tip has changed greatly in the last 10 years. A lot of considerations in what qualifies as a cash tip in this policy. Can you talk about that?
Sure. The key part of it is it has to be voluntary. So if you're going to an establishment and they add the tip automatically, that will not qualify. But beyond that, it's pretty straightforward.
Okay. Yeah. Initially, I didn't think cash tips would include everything from credit cards to even mobile payment methods. But
That's right. Debit cards. It's fairly broad. Again, the people at IRS and Treasury broadly really wanted to make sure that people who are working for tips get the benefit and advantage to it. But again, it has to be voluntary.
Good. What were some of the borderline cases when it comes to payment methods? I know that there's discussion about Bitcoin and some of these other methods.
Right. Those are really the only two. Stablecoin would work. Really, it's only the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and some of the, broadly the cryptos in general. That's really the only exception in terms of the tips. Again, this is in line with, we've got new ways of making payments. And we want to make sure that the people who get those tips don't have to pay taxes on earnings that, aren't treated fairly and properly. So again, it pretty much covers almost everything.
Something else to talk about with exceptions. There were a list of services mentioned that are not going to qualify under these tipping rules. Uh, going by the list I've seen, we're talking about performing arts, healthcare, athletics, law and legal, and finance. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why that's happening.
Sure. Well, the Treasury started with the premise that we want to start with those industries that historically have had very high tip income. And you know from where you sit, casino dealers, waiters, waitresses, bartenders, that's historically where tips have been. It's not been in things like performing arts. It's not been in things like athletics or even financial services where I've spent most of my career. But for those that are uncertain, they should check with their employer. There might be some exceptions. Check with their accountant or tax preparer to make sure that they don't actually do qualify when they think they may not.
Okay. Um, can you discuss a little bit about what qualifies as a tip?
Yeah, I mean, so the best way to think of it would be you're basically given an additional payment or gratuity in response for a service provided at your discretion. That's the voluntary part. That's why if someone's just automatically having to pay a fee for service and that service isn't maybe particularly good or it's just automatic, that wouldn't qualify because it's really for services rendered that you voluntarily are contributing towards. So it's pretty standard.
Nothing about this changes that definition.
Nothing about this changes that definition. No, it's very straightforward, I think, very thoughtful, and basically things that the person who's receiving those tips can easily understand.
Okay.
And
Just
the forms aren't changing this year, by the way, I should also add.
yes, just a couple more things to explore. I wanted to ask about from the employer's perspective. Are there new burdens on small business with this?
No, I don't see that at all. No, because again, the person is filing their taxes and they're going to benefit from it. No, I don't see any impact on the small business. And broadly speaking, when you look at things like small business confidence and sentiment, it has historically boomed under the Trump administration, and we're seeing that very high optimism right now for a whole host of reasons. But no, we do not look at this legislation as being burdensome at all for employers. In fact, if anything, it's going to encourage more people perhaps to go in these industries, which often need people who now will get to take home more of their hard-earned pay because they're not being heavily taxed on it.
Okay, there was some discussion yesterday that I didn't follow in detail. Maybe you can help explain the discussion about how employer rules play a role in what you're allowed to claim and what you aren't.
Yeah, that will be basically employer specific. Kind of relates back to your question about like performing arts versus digital content providers. So I think if you're uncertain, you really have to check with your employer or your tax preparer. And if there are concerns and questions, now is the time people should certainly get out and do it. There's a 30-day period for comment. Normally it's 60, but it's very important. The administration wants to make sure people get their refunds on their 25 taxes as soon as they possibly can. So you've got this important comment period. People should look at it. They can go to irs.gov. Details are officially available on Monday in the Federal Register, but hopefully everything certainly will be done by year end and then people could take advantage of it. But again, if there's any uncertainty, they ought to check with their employer or tax preparer.
Okay, let's talk about 2025 tax season. You mentioned no new forms, no changes to forms, I should say. Um, how will people learn about updates and things that do change based on adjustments because of comments that were seen as good points? How are they going to learn about that?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. Hopefully, just us basically telling people and alerting them to the importance of this is one small step in that direction. We're certainly going to have information coming out on the IRS website. And that's one of those things I think has been such an important issue. It was such a dominant theme in the election that I'm sure many people will know about it, and you'll hear more about it in the coming days and weeks. And the administration really making an important rollout of this new important legislation. So I think people will pretty much know that it's there to take advantage of.